Hello everybody, this is an Ableton tutorial. I'm a bit under the weather, so sorry if my voice sounds a bit stuffy. I'm making this video for my friend Dan. He asked if I would walk him through this track that I made for a slide video. It's only about 2 minutes and it's not exactly finished, but I thought that I would make a tutorial video and I'll probably split it up into a few parts. So the first thing I guess we can do is play the track back. For some reason I'm not able to record my system audio, and it says it would, but it isn't. So I'll just play some of the song and then we'll get into it. Sorry if the quality isn't great. So that's the basic idea. For starters, everything is broken up into 16-bar loops. So that's what we have here. This is the first 16 bars, and that's kind of like the intro. The next 16 bars add in some little bits of percussion, another little synthesizer bit. This right here are some percussion samples that I recorded up at the Hideaway Studios. Next 16 bars, the drums enter. The last 16 bars, a little bit more of just a synthesizer change up, just really small adjustments here, and then I believe I have some kind of effect on the hi-hats, probably a beat repeat, so they play in like little 16 or 30-second bursts. I'm not sure exactly what I did, but we'll get into that. So how I started off is finding this sample on some video online that I thought was cool, and I knew I could take it and I could build off of it. So I used Audio Hijack to record that sample. There's many other ways to do it. You can record directly into Ableton if you want. I just happened to use Audio Hijack this time, so that's what I did. So there's my sample. The next thing I did was I dragged it into DJ. I'll do that for you right now. So I recorded it, opened DJ, dragged it, and dropped it right there, and here it is. So I just took this first section right here. That's the part that I wanted, and that's the part that I looped. So now that I dropped it into DJ, I can make adjustments to the speed, the key, tempo, everything like that, but I'm pretty sure I left it as it is. It says it's 112 BPM. And one of the reasons why I like using DJ for this is because I can adjust the sample quickly and easily. I can adjust the speed in a similar way that you do it on a turntable, so it's kind of like similar if you were sampling off of a turntable. And the key change is very easy to do and sounds really good. It's also something you could just do within Ableton, but the biggest thing is it tells you the tempo. So if you see it says 112 BPM there, my session global tempo is 113. So I could just make it 112 for the purposes of this video. I think I just changed it to 113, I'm not sure why. But let's just call it 112. So now our global session tempo is the same as our sample, and that's what we want because we're about to warp that sample. And then from there, after it's warped, we can make our global Ableton session tempo whatever we want. So this is the solo track edited. I did some other things to it and looped it in a tiny spot and added in this little vocal effect. But so you see, that's the sample I took. It's exactly the same. I didn't change the key, I didn't change the tempo, so there it is. Now, after I have it in DJ, if I did change the key and the tempo, I'd want to hit this record button and record that new sample and then use that. Because I didn't change anything in this case, I can just take that from Audio Hijack and drag it and drop it right in. So now we are working with this sample, and let's get into it. Just double click up at the top bar. You should have auto warp long samples off. Command, preferences. Record, warp, and launch. Auto warp long samples, that should be off. So we double click on it. We're in Ableton. We know our tempo of the sample. Now we're going to hit warp. So the first thing you have to do is tell Ableton exactly where the beginning of the sample is that you want. It already puts in these potential warp markers. They're highlighted in gray. When you double click them, they become warp markers. When you double click them again, they go away. So Ableton does a pretty good job at figuring this out. Let's just put in our first 111 there. So we double click on an area that's going to be the beginning of our sample. We right click that and hit set 1.1.1 here. That says this is now the beginning of the sample. Easy enough. If you take this slide bar at the top and just link it up right there, that kind of just makes everything look a little bit tighter. You don't have to do that, but that will say this is the beginning of the loop. So now that we have 1.1.1 here, and we know the tempo of our sample, it's going to be really easy. We hit warp from here, start at 112 beats per minute. And see, I just did that. It didn't really change a whole lot because it's already pretty close to exactly what the tempo was. Now, if we do another double click here, see it says 1 and then 2. That's just one little bar. Excuse me. Now we have our sample starting here and potentially locked up to end here. Now you see we have these other little gray markers that are potential warp markers, and what we're going to do is just tighten it up. You can drag that over there, drag this to here. I'm basically just tightening up the suggestions that Ableton has given me, and it's not an exact science, you know, you have to have a bit of trial and error. But now we have just this section potentially looped well. If we zoom in on the sample up in the range view, play it back, and watch down here, we can determine where we want our sample to begin and end. So you see I didn't quite finish that out. It actually goes to 3. So we'll just come in here and tighten up the rest of these. The important thing is when you make a loop, wherever you want the loop to end, you don't want any of this extra transient information behind bar 3. Let's say that's where it's ending. If it looks something like that, the beginning of this new section will be in the previous loop. That's not what you want. You want each section to end cleanly on its own. So it's very important for the end of your loop to be at a zero crossing or as close as possible. This would be a zero crossing, but I think for this purpose, that'll be just fine. See how that cleanly starts on a completely new area. We don't want it to look like that. So now if we zoom out, we take our loop marker up in the arrange view and bring it into just that one area right there. Go up to the top right, select this area to loop. Now we'll listen back and see if it loops cleanly and if it's what we want and if we're happy with it. So it sounds pretty good. You can definitely hear it starting back over, but I think that's alright. That's kind of what I want for this one. So if we zoom in, we see that it cleanly ends, doesn't have any of that extra transient within that loop. And what I'm going to do here now is highlight this section, go over to the end of the loop, and hit Command E. That'll slice that sample, and now I'm good. We'll move the rest of this off to the side for now, and we can see that we can now loop this section. If you hold Option and then click at the top, you can copy and paste regions very easily. So now we'll set our loop, play it back. So you can see that that is very similar to this. Now, these regions here have other information in them. The first section is exactly what I just played for you that's looped. The second section has a woman's voice in it and some other effects which I took from this entire thing that I sampled from Audio Hijack. I put bits and pieces together and did an Apple or Command J to consolidate that into a new region. But the concept remains the same. So you could hear the woman's voice right here. This section right here, I just looped the new consolidated region that I had and got that cool effect. But this is really what we're talking about here. This is how I sampled in that initial piece, and that's right here. Sorry about that. Now what I did there is I added in a reverse sweep to kind of start off the phrase. And you could do that quite easily by clicking on a region, coming down to this area where you can adjust the clip, and then hit this reverse button right there. So that's what I did to get that initial phrase in there. So you can hear that pretty easily. That's what I did to start off the track. Once I had that going, I think the next thing I did was probably play some light percussion and some drums along with it. That's usually how I start. I begin with a sample, warp it, loop it to the way I want it, perhaps add in some other bits and pieces, and then I'll go in and start adding in percussion and drum tracks. Even if they aren't the exact sounds that I want to use, I at least start writing the MIDI data or arranging my audio samples, because that way it gets the ball rolling for me and starts to get me thinking about how this would be a real track. You can always go in later and change in the sounds that your MIDI data is referencing. So don't worry too heavily about the sounds right now. We're really just trying to arrange as fast as we can in a way that suits the track, not to be sloppy or to misname things or just have a disorganized session view. But we want to do it as quick as we can so that creative flow just keeps happening and we don't get caught up making decisions about things that slow us down. So I'm just going to solo this audio track and solo this percussion track. And this is what I did next. I made this little percussion track and then just deleted that information at the beginning to kind of arrange it to start off. So if we come down here, I have this jingle bell, I have this shaker, and I have another shaker. And these are all things that I sampled a few weeks ago, and I've been having a lot of fun with them. So this entire drum rack, I can post, and so you can have the exact same thing. What I did was I saved it all as a grouping, and then I just always have it in my Ableton template, so I always have it ready to go. But what I did was I double clicked, so I wanted to use the jingle bells here, and then I clicked on this little box down at the bottom, and that opened up this browser where I can adjust the sample. So you see this highlighted yellow section with these markers is where my sample is being played. I can zoom in on it, I can adjust where it begins and ends, I can adjust the volume, the envelope, and the transposition. And so ultimately what you want to do is transpose all your percussion into the key of the track you're playing. It will sound so much cleaner and tighter, and that's something you really have to do. In this case, I don't think that I changed the transposition of the jingle bells. The shakers I adjusted to 5 semitones above what I normally had it set at, and this other shaker I left the same. So now I had that percussion track. Let's go down to maybe a kick. We'll solo that as well. There's the hi-hat. So that's kind of what I'm working with. I'm just getting a really basic block going on, and actually on that kick I have a beat repeat, which I wouldn't have on there when I'm arranging the actual track. So really just make the simplest possible beat you can and move it around later once the track is starting to breathe and you want to create variations and you want to create kind of a cooler flow. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here and do this in sections. So we'll just call that kind of part 1 of basic warping and just laying down simple percussion or drum tracks and getting the track rolling.